When you've been emotionally ignored, the pain can feel almost invisible at first because it doesn't always arrive as a single shocking moment. It arrives as a pattern, a slow, quiet accumulation of not being met, of speaking and feeling like your words don't land anywhere, of sharing something tender and watching it get brushed past, rerouted, or quietly dismissed. It's the strange experience of being close to someone and still feeling alone. And what makes this kind of neglect so destabilizing is that it can make you doubt your own reality. You start asking yourself if you're being dramatic, if you're too sensitive, if you should just be more patient, more chill, more understanding. You start editing your needs before they even leave your mouth because you've learned over time that your feelings don't get a safe response. So rebuilding your self-worth after being emotionally ignored isn't about becoming louder or tougher overnight. It's about becoming real again inside your own body. It's about returning to a truth you may have been trained to forget. Needing emotional presence is not a character flaw. Wanting care is not weakness. Wanting responsiveness is not too much. Those are normal human needs. And if someone consistently didn't meet them, the conclusion is not that your needs were wrong. The conclusion is that the person you were reaching toward did not have the capacity, the willingness, or the maturity to meet you where you were. That distinction matters, because self-worth collapses when you confuse someone's limitations with your value. Emotional ignoring has a particular way of making you turn inward in the worst way. Instead of turning inward to self-connection, you turn inward to self-blame. You start scanning yourself for defects. You wonder what you could have done differently. You replay conversations. You rewrite texts in your head. You try to find the perfect way to say something so it can finally be received. And the hidden heartbreak is this: you can spend months or years becoming more careful, more articulate, more soft, more understanding, and still be speaking to someone who is committed to not hearing you. Not because they're evil, necessarily. Sometimes it's because they built their whole life around avoidance. Sometimes it's because they learned to survive emotions by shutting down. Sometimes it's because they confuse intimacy with pressure. Sometimes it's because they only engage when it benefits them. Sometimes it's because they simply don't care enough to do the work. Whatever the reason, the result in your nervous system is the same. You feel unseen, and over time, you start to feel less real. That's why emotional ignoring is so corrosive to self-worth. It doesn't just hurt you, it conditions you. It teaches you to live as a smaller version of yourself to keep the connection from disappearing completely. It teaches you to accept partial presence as if it's the best you can get. It teaches you to tolerate hunger and call it love. So the first thing that rebuilds self-worth is naming the injury without minimizing it. Emotional neglect is not nothing. Emotional neglect is the repeated experience of reaching and not being met. And your body doesn't interpret that as a small inconvenience. Your body interprets that as abandonment. Even if the person didn't leave physically, even if they were still around, even if the relationship still existed on paper. The body knows the difference between proximity and attunement. The body knows the difference between someone who is present and someone who is merely there. And when you've been emotionally ignored, your system often becomes hyper-aware. You might find yourself watching their mood, their tone, their energy, trying to predict whether it's safe to speak. You might feel a tightness in your chest before you bring something up, because you already expect the shutdown. You might feel the urge to over-prepare, to soften, to apologize preemptively, to present your feelings in the most reasonable way possible. And then, when you still don't get met, something inside you can start to fracture. Not dramatically, quietly. You start believing that being fully yourself is risky. You start believing that your emotions are inconvenient. You start believing that love is something you earn by being easy to handle. That belief is the bruise. That belief is what we're dissolving. Because self-worth is not the absence of emotion. Self-worth is the steady knowledge that your inner world deserves respect and care. The reason this is hard is because emotional ignoring creates a kind of double bind. If you speak up, you feel rejected or dismissed. If you stay quiet, you feel invisible and resentful. So you can end up oscillating. Sometimes you try to explain everything, and sometimes you shut down completely. Sometimes you chase clarity, and sometimes you pretend you don't care. Sometimes you tell yourself you're fine, and then you break down later in private because your body is carrying what your voice wasn't allowed to hold out loud. None of that makes you unstable. It makes you human. It makes you someone whose nervous system has been asked to adapt to an environment that didn't consistently respond. And here's a truth that is both gentle and sharp. You cannot rebuild self-worth while continuously treating emotional neglect as normal. You can't rebuild self-worth while your heart is still bargaining for basic care. Because the very act of bargaining teaches your system that love is scarce and you must compete for it. So part of rebuilding self-worth is letting reality become clear. Not cruel, clear. Reality is that emotionally available people respond. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but they engage. They turn toward you. They care about impact. They repair. They don't make you feel like your feelings are a nuisance you need to manage alone. When someone consistently doesn't respond, that is not a communication style. That is a relational limit. And once you see it as a limit, you stop interpreting it as a personal failure. You stop treating yourself like a project that needs to become more acceptable. You start seeing that the problem was never your humanity. The problem was the environment your humanity was placed in. Now, rebuilding self-worth after emotional ignoring also means understanding what you were actually trying to get. Most people think they were trying to get answers, or attention, or reassurance. But underneath that, you were trying to get one simple thing: confirmation that you exist in someone's mind and heart. That you matter enough to be considered, held, responded to. Emotional ignoring deprives you of that confirmation, and the deprivation can create a hunger that looks like obsession. You might not even want the person as much as you want the relief of finally being met, because being met would soothe the part of you that started to feel unreal. So when you're rebuilding, it helps to separate those two experiences: the person and the need. The need is real and valid. The person may not have been capable of meeting it, and that separation is one of the most stabilizing forms of clarity, because it protects your worth from being tied to someone else's capacity. It also helps you stop romanticizing the dynamic. Sometimes emotional neglect can feel strangely intense because it creates longing, and longing can masquerade as depth. But depth is not the same as deprivation. A relationship that keeps you emotionally hungry can keep you psychologically focused, but focus is not fulfillment. Longing is not intimacy. Self-worth begins to return when you stop confusing intensity with love and start recognizing that real love feels like emotional safety. Real love feels like being responded to. Real love feels like you don't have to fight to be understood. Another subtle way emotional ignoring damages self-worth is that it trains you to become your own prosecutor. You start building cases against yourself. You interrogate your feelings. You tell yourself you should have handled it differently. You criticize your reactions. You keep trying to become better so the neglect won't happen again. But what if the neglect had very little to do with you? What if the neglect was always about their inability or refusal to show up? In that case, self-improvement doesn't solve the wound. It just deepens the belief that you had to earn decency. So the repair is not becoming perfect. The repair is refusing to make love conditional on your self-erasure. Self-worth is the moment you stop trying to be easy to ignore. Now, let's talk about the moment you start coming back. It often begins with a quiet realization. I am tired. Not just tired of them, tired of explaining, tired of waiting, tired of making your needs smaller, tired of pretending you don't care. That tiredness can be sacred, because it's the part of you that still knows you deserve more. It's the part of you that refuses to normalize emotional absence. And when you honor that tiredness, you start to shift from chasing to choosing. You start to see that you don't need more conversations with someone who keeps shutting down. You need more alignment with yourself. You need more consistency in your own inner life. You need to stop putting your emotional well-being in the hands of someone who proved they were unreliable with it. This is where people misunderstand self-worth. They think self-worth is swagger, or indifference, or being unbothered. But real self-worth is quiet. It's when you no longer abandon yourself for access. It's when you stop trying to win care. It's when you stop performing pain, hoping it will be taken seriously. It's when you stop arguing for your reality. You don't become cold. You become clear. You become steady. You become someone who treats your feelings as important, even when someone else does not. And this clarity changes your standards. Not in an angry way, in an honest way. You begin to recognize what is non-negotiable for you. You begin to see that affection without emotional presence is not enough. You begin to see that chemistry without safety is not enough. You begin to see that being wanted in moments but ignored in meaning is not enough. And you also begin to notice something. The more you stop chasing emotional availability, the more you can actually feel yourself again. Because you're not constantly scanning someone else's mood. You're not constantly bracing for dismissal. Your energy returns to your body. Your attention returns to your life. Your dignity returns to your posture. You start making choices that reflect respect for yourself, not desperation for them. This is how self-worth rebuilds. Not by forcing yourself to feel confident, but by living in a way that stops reinforcing the old wound. Emotional ignoring taught you that you had to shrink. Self-worth rebuilds when you stop shrinking. And stopping shrinking doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a quiet withdrawal from dynamics that starve you. Sometimes it looks like refusing to keep offering intimacy to someone who treats it as optional. Sometimes it looks like letting silence remain silent instead of filling it with your effort. Sometimes it looks like noticing the urge to over-explain and choosing not to. Because over-explaining is often a response to being repeatedly misunderstood on purpose. You start believing you must convince them. But in healthy relationships, you don't have to convince someone to care about your feelings. They care because they care. You don't have to plead for basic responsiveness. Responsiveness is normal. So, a major sign of self-worth returning is when you stop trying to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. You stop auditioning for empathy. You stop negotiating your boundaries into softer language. You stop translating your pain into something palatable. You allow the truth to be simple. This hurts, and I don't want this anymore. And here's a deeply healing truth. Sometimes the relationship didn't break you because you weren't enough. It broke you because you were trying to love someone who could only meet you halfway, and you kept walking the other half alone. That loneliness is what broke you down. Not your need, not your sensitivity, not your love. The loneliness, the constant emotional solo, the constant reaching into space. So, when you rebuild, you've stopped treating your sensitivity like a liability. You stop treating your desire for depth as a flaw. You start seeing your sensitivity as a signal of what you need: presence, honesty, responsiveness, repair. And then, slowly, you start letting those needs guide your choices. Self-worth is when you stop asking yourself, "How do I get them to show up?" and start living from the truth. I deserve someone who wants to show up. And if that person is not in front of me, I will not punish myself by begging for scraps. I will not keep proving I'm lovable by tolerating neglect. I will not keep calling it love if it makes me disappear. That's the turning point. And it can feel tender because you may still miss them. You may still care. You may still replay the good moments. That's normal. Missing is not evidence that you should return to being ignored. Missing is simply evidence that your attachment system bonded. Bonds can form even in starving environments. The presence of a bond doesn't mean the environment was healthy. So, you hold your tenderness, and you hold your clarity at the same time. You can be soft without being available for neglect. You can love without sacrificing yourself. You can remember without reopening the wound daily. And over time, something changes. You start to feel less desperate for their attention. You start to feel less affected by their silence. You start to feel more stable in your own company. You start to enjoy your own mind again. You start to notice that the things you used to say to yourself in shame are quieter now. You start to catch yourself before you spiral into self-blame. You start to recognize what is and isn't yours. Their emotional absence was not yours to fix. Their inability to meet you was not your failure. Their distance was not a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their limits. And as you accept that, you reclaim your dignity. You reclaim your voice. You reclaim your standards. You reclaim your life. This is the gentle truth I want to leave you with this morning. Self-worth is not something you have to earn back by becoming different. Self-worth is something you return to by refusing to keep participating in what taught you you were less. You were never less. You were just in a place where your feelings weren't honored. And now you're leaving that place, internally, even if the world hasn't caught up yet. You're choosing reality over longing. You're choosing yourself over the chase. You're choosing emotional safety over emotional starvation. And that choice, made quietly and consistently, is what makes you whole again. Welcome to Attachment Alchemy Lab. You're safe here.